are military analytics. In the Russia-Ukraine war, the developments in the sea area are as important as the conflicts in the air and land area because both countries that are at war have coasts on the seas. Therefore, the naval power of the armies is of great importance in the war. The Russian Navy, which did not want to lose its dominance on the seas, had to withdraw some of its ships in the Black Sea. Since the beginning of the war and lost many important ships, the Ukrainian army is doing an excellent job of defending the port cities and targeting the occupiers of Russian-occupied port cities such as Sevastopol. The fighting on the front lines of the Russian-Ukrainian war is undoubtedly affecting developments inside the country, so much so that important personalities such as oligarchs, politicians, and military officials living on Russian soil and having an impact on the war are being murdered in Russia or committing suicide under suspicious circumstances. In addition, the Russian army's targeting of Ukrainian residential areas and civilians as well as fires of unknown origin in Russia are indicators that the war has spread within countries. What about the seas? A Russian ship caught fire off the coast of South Korea the other day. This development shows that the war has spread to the seas as much as it has spread to Russian territory. With this, it has brought the tension between Russia and South Korea, which started in the past months. Back to the agenda. Let's evaluate the burning ship and the developments between Russia and South Korea together. According to reports based on the Consulate General of Busan, a Russian fishing vessel sailing off the coast of Ulsan, South Korea, burst into flames for an undetermined reason. All 25 crew members on board were affected by the fire. 4 sailors died as a result of the fire. The fire occurred on a Russian ship off the coast of Ulsan, about 300 kilometers southeast of the South Korean capital, Seoul, at 12:43 p.m. local time. A Russian ship was seen engulfed in flames of Ulsan. The ship was on its way to deliver 100 tons of fish and seafood to Russia, but it stopped off the coast of Ulsan with an unknown fire. The severity of the fire was quite large. The 25 people on board, all of whom are estimated to be Russian nationals, called for help to the crew members after the fire. About 4 hours after the fire, the authorities of the Republic of Korea made a statement about the incident. According to the statement, 21 of the 25 people on board were evacuated. Among those evacuated for Russia's with light and severe burns, the Ulsan Coast Guard said the injured were taken for emergency treatment. The remaining 4 sailors of the crew were missing, according to the first dot announced. But after a while, it was announced that 4 sailors died as a result of the ship's fire. The Russian state news agency reported that the bodies were found on a ship called Kaltern. A spokesperson for the Russian Federal Fisheries Agency's Forest Expedition Emergency Response Team told the Russian broadcaster that 21 people rescued from the fire on the ship were carried to lifeboats and from there transferred to South Korea rescue ships. According to the spokesperson, the ship's captain was the first of the 4 people declared dead. A spokesperson for the Russian Federal Fisheries Agency's Forest Expedition Emergency Response Team reported that the ship's captain gave the order to put the evacuated crew on lifeboats. Many comments were made about the statements made after the Russian ship caught fire off the coast of Ulsan. The most commented statement came from a spokesperson of the Russian state news agency. According to the statement, the ship that burned off Ulsan was on its way to the Sea of Okhotsk after being repaired in Busan. The accuracy of the statement was debated because it did not seem possible for the ship to be repaired and set sail immediately after a fire in which 4 members of the ship's crew died and more than 1 person was injured. Another statement that will lead to the discussion of the statement came from South Korea. A South Korean news agency announced that the fishing vessel was towed to the port of Ulsan, and the fire was extinguished by a team of firefighters. The fact that the statements made by 2 different countries were not consistent with each other raised questions. The Russian authorities' policy of hiding the truth since the beginning of the war was also seen in the incident where the fishing vessel caught fire. The burning of a Russian ship off the coast of South Korea is allegedly related to the recent tensions between Russia and South Korea. Last week, South Korea announced that it would provide military support to Ukraine in case of a significant attack against civilians. This statement caused panic in the Kremlin, so much so that Russia made a statement immediately after South Korea's announcement. Russia criticized South Korea's decision and warned Seoul against providing any military support to Kyiv. South Korea has provided assistance to Ukraine since the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian war, but this was not military aid. Until recently, South Korea had been hesitant to provide military aid to Ukraine. But the statement made by South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol on the other day surprised everyone. Yoon Suk-yeol's statement is as follows: if there is a situation that the international community cannot condone, such as a large-scale attack on civilians, it may be difficult for us to insist only on humanitarian or financial support. The South Korean president's dramatic statements prompt an immediate response. Dmitry Medvedev, deputy chairman of the Russian Security Council, issued a stern warning to South Korea. Medvedev said new enthusiasts have appeared eager to help our enemies. South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol said that in principle, his country is ready to supply weapons to the regime. Until recently, the South Koreans strongly assured that the possibility of supplying Kiev with lethal weapons had been completely ruled out. I wonder what the people of that country will say when they see Russia's latest weapon in the hands of their closest neighbor, our partners in North Korea. Russia is increasingly backed into a corner by Western and European military aid to Ukraine. Russian leader Vladimir Putin wants to unjustly invade Ukraine and accuses all countries that are helping Ukraine of being involved in the war. Following South Korea's statements, Medvedev's statement also contains a hidden threat. Medvedev concluded his statement as follows: the beginning of arms supplies will mean indirect involvement in this conflict at a certain stage. In addition to Western and European countries, the Ukrainian army could also receive military assistance from the Asian country of South Korea, since this would put the Russian occupiers in a difficult situation. The occupiers warned South Korea before South Korea provided assistance. The war on the front is heating. Cockpit, diplomatic relations. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and his military are likely to continue losing both on the front and in diplomacy. What do you think about the burning ship off the coast of South Korea? Could South Korea be behind the burning of the ship? Do you think South Korea will provide military support to Ukraine? What will be Putin's attitude towards these developments? The transfer of the wheeled armored vehicle M1117 ASV Guardian 4x4 to Ukraine from the United States started on November 4, 2022. Rail transport is used to deliver armored vehicles through Romania through the Romanian port of Constanta. The armored vehicles came by sea. The first batch was transported to Ukraine via railroad from the dock. Approximately 40 Guardians were dispatched in this initial round. The Americans promised keep 250 Planck Mass 1117 ASV Guardian armored vehicles from U.S. Army storage. Regarding the rest of the quantity's delivery date, virtually anything has yet to be confirmed. The Americans are attempting to replace and supplement the tracked M113 armored personnel vehicles that were previously deployed to Ukraine with this shipment. The videos and posts that frequently surface on social media indicate that American M113 armored personnel vehicles are suffering significant casualties. The United States began sending out these armored vehicles in the early 2020s, establishing agreements to provide 145 armored personnel carriers to Colombia, 55 to Kosovo, and 1,200 to Greece. Now Ukraine is getting its turn. Other funding is set aside for the repair and maintenance of already transferred equipment, as well as for the makeover of 250 Planck Mass 1117 armored security vehicles. The head of the presidential office for Ukraine, Andrei Yermak, expressed gratitude, quote, "We appreciate the American allies providing Ukraine with an additional $400 million in military help. T-72 tanks, M11-17 armored security vehicles, armored river boats, and Phoenix Ghost tactical unmanned aerial systems are among those specifically mentioned. We shall confront Russian evil together," said Yermak. 250 Planck Mass 11-17 wheeled armored reconnaissance vehicles, as opposed to SUVs or the less armored Burden II, would offer the Ukrainians a far higher level of protection when operating. The vehicles were spotted being shipped by train from the port of Constanta in Romania. The majority of them are covered with camouflage. That makes the vehicles operational in Europe, although some are painted in traditional desert tones. They will make it possible for duties to be performed much more safely, for instance, by civilian or light armored military vehicles like the Burden II or the multipurpose Humvee. This is a great reinforcement for the Ukrainian infantry. But stay tuned until the end of the video to see what the technical characteristics of this vehicle are. The internal security vehicle M1117, Guardian, commonly known as Armored Security Vehicle or ASV, is based on the V100 and V150 Commando series of armored vehicles for use by the American Military Police Corps. It was created in the late 1990s. The M11-17 began serial production in early 2000 after the first prototype showed in February 1997 in Iraq and Afghanistan. American military, police, and convoy security groups use the vehicle. It is a more reinforced and well-armored equivalent for the armored M11-14 Humvee, occasionally referred to as the Humvee, which was not initially intended to be an armored combat vehicle. The vehicle, previously known as the ASV-150, the ancestor of the M11-17 Guardian, is a modernized variant of the V-100 Commando series of armored fighting vehicles made by Cadillac Gage and deployed by the U.S. Army Military Police in the Vietnam War. These vehicles were frequently utilized to provide armed escorts for wheeled convoys for base security duties. The USAF in South Vietnam used an open-hatch turretless commando due to the use of Timony's independent suspension system. The ASV-150 was a much upgraded version of the older Cadillac Gage vehicle, with better armor protection and better mobility. The M11-17 weighs roughly 15 tons compared to the 20-ton Stryker ICV and 25-ton M2 Bradley armored vehicle. It takes 7 seconds to accelerate to a speed of just 20 miles per hour compared to a Bradley, which is 11 feet 9 inches or 3.594 meters wide. It is just 7 feet 9 inches or 2.375 meters broad. The crew has 360-degree visibility. When buttoned up, it is comparable to both the Stryker and the Humvee in terms of size and capabilities. There is proper ventilation in the crew area. Also, M11-17 have withstood several IED assaults in Iraq and Afghanistan. Some vehicles more than once after an IED destroyed all 4 tires on one ASV. It traveled back 28 miles or 45 kilometers away. The M11-17 Guardian's gas particle air filtering system was created to offer extra defense against chemical and biological assaults, but it is not currently in use because there aren't enough crew masks for the system. There have been multiple rollover accidents involving the M11-17. Rolling over soldiers are more likely to survive because the turret's entire enclosure prevents the gunner from being ejected. However, there have been at least 2 instances of rollovers where the turret detached from the vehicle, killing 2 soldiers. An M11-17 average mission profile includes the following: 50% of travel on primary highways, 30% of travel on second-class roads, 20% of travel across country roads. It makes use of an Allison transmission MD-3500/60, as well as allowing for smooth highway speeds of up to 70 miles per hour or 110 kilometers per hour. The vehicle's front and rear independent suspension enable it to cross water up to 5 feet or 1.5 meters deep, climb 60% gradients, navigate 30% side slopes, and pass over barriers as high as 5 feet. It has an 18-inch or 46-centimeter ground clearance and a 27.5 feet or 8.4 meters turning radius. And all these features are more than enough for the difficult terrain on the Ukrainian battlefield. All in all, this is an impressive vehicle that will strengthen the offensive forces of the Ukrainian military, which has already been well tempered on other battlefields in the world. The M11-17 is capable of carrying personnel, which is excellent for maneuvering in a large area such as the Ukrainian battlefield. The rapidly deteriorating weather precipitated a shift in a focus on urban fighting. The increased intensity of clashes inside the city allowed Russians to secure more gains and start establishing control over tactically significant positions such as factories and high-rise buildings. However, in order to not allow Russians to reap the benefits of these positions, Ukrainians started using various methods of wiping them out together with the Russians. Last time I told you that Ukrainians and Russians in Bakhmut faced the biggest snowfall of the decade that completely covered the ground and trenches and made the infantry fights impossible. However, urban fights are much less affected by such weather conditions, although during the snowfall, the intensity of attacks did slow down because both parties could not use drones and artillery. The freshest reports suggest that once the sky became clear, the clashes inside the city rapidly resumed. In the southern part of the region, the Ukrainian 93rd Mechanized Brigade showed how they continue to destroy enemy forces' concentrations. Since everything is covered in snow, spotting manpower in the streets with thermal cameras became much easier, which works more against Russians as they have to get out of cover and assault Ukrainian positions. After the whole squad entered the house, Ukrainians started shelling it with artillery. Since Russians started applying a lot of pressure from the west in an attempt to reach the stadium, Ukrainians started narrowing down the cauldron. But before withdrawing, Ukrainians also made sure to leave some surprises. It seems like instead of using standard booby traps, Ukrainians are waiting until the Russians enter the house and then manually blow up the whole building. Recent combat footage shows how Ukrainians are operating on the outskirts. They pulled the cord from the house across the street during the withdrawal and then manually detonated the explosives from a distance. But the 93rd Mechanized Brigade loved the biggest surprise for Russians on Mariupol Street. Here, Russians have been fighting for weeks to establish control over the tallest building in the region. When Ukrainians realized that they needed to step back to the other side of the street, they mined the whole building. I recently released for the old footage reveals that the moment Russians assumed this tactically significant positions, Ukrainians completely destroyed it. When it comes to the central part of the region, Russians continue to have the initiative. Today it was reported that they managed to secure the second half of the block near the embankment with the shrinking control over the river bank. It becomes harder and harder to hold the rest of the positions along the river, which is why it is expected that in the next few days Ukrainians will step back towards the main street. Russians are trying to suppress Ukrainian fire and penetrate the defenses deeper. With the drop in temperatures, doing it became easier because of the more visible contrast on thermal cameras. However, due to the density of high-rise buildings, gaining control over each street takes a lot of manpower. Yesterday, Russian war correspondent Alexander Karchenko said that there is so much death here that Russian forces operating in Bakhmut have become apathetic to the deaths of their comrades. He said that very often soldiers use the line on the ground corpses as markers when giving each other directions. In the northern part of the region, Ukrainians seem to have gained even more ground. As you remember, several weeks ago, Russians penetrated Ukrainian defenses here and gained control over 2 streets. 2 days ago, I told you that Ukrainians recaptured one street because the fights reportedly took place near the stadium. And today Ukrainians blew up the bridge right behind them. Some sources say that Russians were not pushed out and Ukrainians cut them off from the south, while other sources said that such operation would be too risky to conduct without gaining total control over the last street. Today, Ukrainians also released footage of a precision strike on the occupied territory of the ESM industrial complex. The strike was conducted with the Soviet tactical ballistic missile Tochka-U. It seems like this was not the only strike because in the video one operator said to prepare for the second one. Overall, despite the fact that the weather temporarily made infantry fights impossible in the fields, Ukrainians and Russians still engaged in heavy fights inside the city. As Russians started moving into the areas with big buildings that, unlike small houses on the outskirts, could be used as powerful firing points, storage for ammunition, and in some cases, even equipment, Ukrainians started resorting to more drastic measures, such as blowing up the buildings, bridges, and even hitting Russians with the scarce ballistic missiles. Such measures are very effective and do not allow Russians to secure powerful positions to minimize their losses.